Hello and welcome to a new episode of Experiencing Minecraft Infinite, formerly Experiencing Infdev Plus, and this episode is a bit of a special one as it will be released on the 3rd anniversary of this world, and I've decided to celebrate it. I'm kind of going to go through the history of this world, kind of show how it evolved through the versions, and I'm starting off in the version in which I've created this world, that being a dev build of 0.1. During this video, I will also be showing clips from the older episodes of this series. If I recall correctly, this dev build wasn't too different from the released version of 0.1. I believe the biggest difference is that the apple trees had the same shape as the oak trees in the dev builds. When I generated this world, I've spawned on this beach near this lake, after which I've of course started gathering some wood to get started, and then I've started looking for a place that I would call my home. Now looking around, I feel like there are probably better places where I could have settled, like that hill over there, that one over there, this one, or some of the sort of flatter terrain. Or instead I kind of decided to keep going this way until I've reached that hill over there, which eventually became my home. And of course the first thing I did after arriving at this hill was that I started digging out a hole which could become my home. After all, I needed some place to stay, but eventually I decided to decorate it. However, before I started decorating my home, I had actually built another thing, that being a big wheat farm, which served as one of my sources of food. However, looking at it now, I kind of question its position. I feel like if I went back, I probably could have placed it better, but I guess the location can be blamed on my lack of foresight, lack of planning, as I didn't really know what to expect from the future. So I guess it's fine over here. It's kind of interesting to fly around to see how much this place has changed over time. There are a lot of things missing, however, things like this hill are the same, but this hill isn't in the present version of this world. One of the things that I discovered in this step build is a cube glitch. Basically, if you placed an item into the crafting grid and enclose it, you'd kind of get two items dropped. One of those would be a 0 stack. So using this method, you could kind of do certain items by reducing the 0 stack to a negative stack. And using those cubed items, I've built this room. I've also prepared like a stash of 12 blocks behind this wall. I've kind of prepared them for a rainy day in case I need them in the future. However, I never really ended up using any of them. There's quite a lot of them, I believe. I've actually kept this room a secret for quite a while and didn't show it in the episode until I can't remember when. It was around 0.1 when I had also discovered a dungeon quite close to the spawn. Here it is. If we just go through this cave, here you can see it. It is a zombie dungeon. And so I decided to build a zombie farm. At the time it wasn't really useful since the only thing that zombies dropped was rotten flesh. But I built it because I thought that in the future they might drop something useful. But as it turns out, this farm never really became useful. But I still think it was a nice project to work on. This was quite a big project back then, as I had to use quite a lot of wood, so I've built a simple tree farm about it, and I also had to do some landscaping to make sure the structure around the farm would fit underground so that it wouldn't stick above ground. In the previous clip, I have also shown this path, which I have also built in 0.1, and it connects the spawn to the farm and to the base that I have. The last thing that I had built in the 0.1 versions was the tower, which reached to the old height limit of 256. Well, I say build, but I hadn't actually finished it until like 0.2 since I was missing some glass. I'm currently in a copy of the world from a dev build of 0.2, and as you can see, I'm still missing some glass at the top. Now, earlier I've mentioned that I didn't really plan ahead in my role because I didn't know what to expect from the future, how the mod would turn out overall, but that's not entirely true because I knew some things that would be added in the near future. For example, I knew that in 0.2 boats would be added, and so I decided to build these waterways in 0.1. I decided to start working on them in 0.1 because I thought that it would be nice to use the boats to travel around the world, and so I decided to connect my base to the zombie farm that I had built. But I don't really consider this a 0.1 build, that's because I did a lot of the work in 0.2. Another thing that I started working on in 0.1 but finished in 0.2 was the skeleton farm, which was actually useful unlike the zombie farm. That's because I got bones, which I could use to make bone meal, which was before fertilizer was added, so I could still use it to grow stuff. I also got arrows, both for the crossbows, which were newly added, and the bows. That's because early on in the development of 0.2, skeletons dropped the bolts for crossbows instead of the arrows for bows. And lastly, I also got some armor because in 0.2, hostile mobs like skeletons and zombies were given armor, and they could also drop the armor, and so I got quite a bit of armor from killing these skeletons here. After that, when the development of version 0.2 started, I decided to make a garden in the front of my house, and I also decided to expand my house. It was around this time that I've also decided to expand my house for every major version. Here you can see the sort of layout that I decided on and marked out using dirt. Now, here is a hallway. Here I would add a bathroom. Here is the bedroom, which I had built because this version added beds. Then next to the bedroom I would add a closet. Opposite of the bedroom we got a storage room, which would take up 2 floors. And next to it we got a room which was originally supposed to be the map room. However, I ended up turning it into a corridor which you can use to reach the other parts of the house. Version 0.2 added quite a few new things, those being things like sprinting, offhand, new blocks, and also some new structures, those being abandoned villages and labyrinths, which are basically groups of interconnected vanilla dungeons. And so I went ahead and did some exploring to find these structures, and while exploring I happened to find this labyrinth and also a dungeon close to it. By the way, the thing that's special about this labyrinth is that it has got 2 spider spawners relatively close to one another, and so I decided to turn this thing into a spider farm. The way this thing works is fairly simple. The spiders just spawn, the water carries them into the center, and once they get there they get killed by lava, which is a bit hard to show. And to farm them I would simply stand between these fence gates to collect all of the drops. As you can see, I got quite a lot of string from this farm, but you don't really need to do this sort of thing in the newest version, as you can simply turn cotton into string. Aside from the farm, I've also built this house and that station over there so you could reach this place faster using a minecart. The reason why I decided to build this was because I thought it would be nice to build some outposts in newer chunks with every major version, but eventually I gave up on that because, of the time constraints. I didn't have enough time to work on both the main base and the outposts with the update base. Anyway, you may notice that the outpost is looking a bit weird with these logs, and that's because this is a copy of the world from 0.3, which I've also loaded up in 0.3. That's because I didn't have a copy from 0.2 which would have this house. And also, as you may be able to tell, these are based on the Beta 1.8 development villages. Also, one more thing that I'd like to mention is that 0.2 also added these rivers, which aren't actually biomes. I think they look quite cool. These rivers were also part of my plans to use boats to travel around my world. These rivers also introduced the first chunk borers into my world. And after version 0.2, of course, came out version 0.3, which added a whole lot of new biomes, mobs, blocks, and other things. And so I decided to record myself exploring them, even while the version was still being developed. And to make things more interesting, I decided to build this hot air balloon to kind of make it look like I'm using it to go to the new chunks to explore them. I was kind of inspired by Pac-Man CX, although I didn't do it nearly as good as like he does his roleplay stuff. I think it was still a nice idea. I like the fact that I decided to build this because it adds to the history of this world. And I kind of every time, well, not every time, but often when I look at it, I remember those times. And I also, of course, built a copy of the hot air balloon in the place where I quote unquote landed, that being a mesa biome, which you may notice is looking a bit weird. That's because I generated it during the dev builds of 0.3, and back then in the early dev builds there were only 6 colors of hardened clay, not all of the, I believe, 19 that we have now. And so when the other colors were added, the metadata values got kind of moved around, so I ended up with this sort of mesa. I did quite a bit of exploring back then to make sure that I would show all of the new biomes in my episode. I say episode, but it actually took me 3 episodes to cover everything. In the first 2 episodes, I've covered the biomes, and in the last episode, I took a look at the new mobs that were unique to the biomes. And I've just remembered that the place where I first landed with the hot air balloon was actually here, next to some mountains, ocean, farmland, and a seasonal forest, which back then was called simply forest, and it also didn't have any maple trees in the dev build where I've generated it. But aside from exploring, I also did some building. I expanded my base, of course. Here you can see kind of the layout. I've expanded on the hallway that was already existing. I made a new hallway using the new wood type. Next to it, I built a staircase. Next to it, we've got a closet of sorts. Then we've got the entrance hall, which has got a flower in the middle. The entrance hall leads to this room, which would eventually become the large storage room, which is still yet unfinished. And also to this room, which I use as my cotton farm. And lastly, we got the biggest room, which I would call the biome room, which is supposed to be a mini version of the overworld to kind of represent how the world looked back then. I say back then because since then the overworld has changed quite a bit. Some biomes have been added, some biomes have been removed, and such things. It actually took me quite a while to finish this section. I'm currently in a copy from 0.3.1, and as you can see, it's still unfinished. I believe I've only finished it in the dev builds of 0.4. And here's how the 0.3 section looks like from the outside. But the house expansion wasn't the only building project that I undertook back then. That's because, as I've mentioned for 0.2, back then I wanted to build some outposts in newer chunks with every major version, and this was the outpost for 0.3. As you can see, it's built along a waterway. That's because back then I was planning to use waterways to travel around the world. However, I eventually gave up on that. That's because of the addition of teleporters. Also, I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but I think this house turned out quite well, especially the roof. The inside is also nice, but I'd say not as interesting as the outside, so I guess I need to work on my interior designing skills a bit more. One last thing that I'd like to mention about this place is that it was generated in the early builds of 0.3. Back then the pine trees weren't a thing, so this tundra generated with oak trees instead. That was it for 0.3, so now we are moving on to 0.4, which was basically the caves update of this mod, as it added caves biome and also increased the height limit of the worlds by adding 64 blocks underground and 64 blocks above ground for 120 blocks in total. However, unlike 1.18, it didn't add the 64 blocks that were underground sort of below the world. Instead, it raised the whole world. So as a result, I got these trunk bores. Of course, I went ahead and explored all of the new cave biomes in an episode. Thankfully, there were relatively few compared to the number of biomes that are above ground, so it didn't take too long. Also, it was around this time when I finally decided to talk in my videos, because before then I didn't do like a live commentary, I only had like text that would appear on screen. But in episode 13 I decided to also start talking in my episodes, which was also the first time that I talked in any of my videos, because before then I was kind of unsure about it. Also, the fact that the whole world was raised in 0.4 meant that large parts of the old chunks were now considered to be below ground, so as a result I got this grave fog, unlike the white fog you get when you are above the sea level. Here you can see how the fog is supposed to look like when you are above the sea level. The new one, which is at 128. I also, of course, expanded my house for version 0.4. Now, if we use the staircase from the 0.3 section, we will reach this large hall, which is connected to the 0.3 section through this flower, and it also is connected to the second floor of the cotton farm, a lavishly decorated bathroom, the start system, which is still unfinished, and there is the corridor, which is connected to the alchemy room that I have built because 0.4 introduced brewing, and it has chests for all of the brewing ingredients plus some extra chests, although that proved to be not enough as more ingredients were added, and now in the modern versions I don't have enough chests for all of the brewing ingredients, so that each chest would have got like one ingredient. And next to it we got a collection room where I got a bunch of chests with some unobtainable items and some memorabilia. And if we continue going down this hallway, we can either go left or right. If we go right, we'll reach the 0.2 part of the section through what was supposed to be originally the map room. And if we go left, we'll reach the entrance hall of this section of the house. As you can see, the entrance hall has a kitchen of sorts with some basic storage, some furnaces and a crafting table, because I thought that I might end up using it, but I never really ended up doing so. You may have also noticed I got this tree, which I decided to preserve instead of cutting down, and it's because this apple tree was generated back in the dev build of 0.1, back when the apple trees had the same shape as the oak trees. So I decided to preserve it since there are only like a limited amount of them. Of course I could build another one, but that wouldn't be the same. Another thing that I started working on back then was a minecart system for my base. That's because as I was expanding it, it was taking longer and longer to get from one end to the other. Of course I had sprinting, but I felt it didn't last nearly long enough. It took several depletes of the sprint part to get from one point to the other sometimes. So I thought that the minecarts would be the future. However, I ended up dropping the minecart system idea as beacons were introduced, because with beacons I could get the stamina effect in this area, which meant that I would get infinite sprint, and I could also get the swiftness to effect, so I could get around my base quite quickly thanks to these. 0.4 also introduced the weather, which meant that you could get snow in the cold biomes, sandstorms in the deserts, and rain and thunderstorms in all of the other biomes that weren't like hot biomes. And later on, we also got ash falling in the volcanic wasteland biome. Aside from expanding my house and exploring, I also worked on this thing, which was supposed to be a waypoint, because back then I was still considering using boats to travel around my world. So things like these would guide me to different outposts, like different bases that I would use. For example, I could set up like a base in one biome so that I could get the chlorite stone, or I could set up a base in a desert to get the sand, and I would travel to these by boats. Of course, I eventually gave up on that idea because teleporters got introduced, so I didn't really need to use boats like this to travel from my base to these outposts. But I had also used this place as an outpost back then. If we go inside, you can see that I got some materials that I gathered while staying here. I even set up a pen for some horses that I tamed, which later died, and I used this ravine right here to gather some resources. I had also planted this mangrove tree here. That's because back then when you planted a mangrove tree, its roots would grow until they just hit the ground, so you could get roots like these. It's quite close to the tower. Now, the next thing that I'm about to show you is something that I had built during the development of 0.5, but I still consider it a 0.4 build. It's because it utilizes the 0.4 channel borders. It's something that I call the house on the edge of the world. That's because from these angles it kind of looks like it's on the edge of the world. The reason why I built this was because I wanted to use it as an outpost for gathering resources. I wanted to use it to gather sand and sandstone for building, and also antlion pincers from antlion so I could make haste potions to make digging faster, because I wanted to keep expanding my house, and for that I needed to do a lot of digging. Of course, version 0.4 also added some other things like new blocks, items, structures, mobs. It also changed how food works, among other things. And now on to 0.5, which added the boss dungeons and the special dungeon gear, which I wanted to show in my episodes, so I decided to show the items in creative. The reason for that is because back in 0.5 we didn't have the scrapping mechanic, which meant that if you had like duplicate items, you couldn't scrap them to turn them into the items you wanted, which meant that you kind of had to rely on luck to get all of the items that you wanted from the chests, which meant like relying a lot on RNG, so I thought it would be better to use creative instead of trying to find them in survival, since there were quite a few items for me to show. In that episode I had shown how each of the items works, which item is found in which dungeon, and also how you repair them. And now on to the house expansion, during which I only built 3 rooms plus a big hallway. Here you can see an early layout. Here we got the hallway, which would later on go through this room. Then there is this room, which would eventually become smaller thanks to the hallway, and it will be used to store the dungeon items that I would find. Another room will be right over here, although it is not present in the current layout. This room would be filled with hellforges. That's because I only finished this expansion in 0.6, so I decided to include the hellforges as well, and have this room be used as a smelting room. And lastly, there is the entrance hall, which is special because it actually takes up 2 floors instead of 1. And you may also notice that I got a spot reserved for each of the teleporters, except the diamond one, which gets added in the future. Here we got the 3 teleporters associated with the overworld gems, then the purple one for amethyst and crimson, and the yellow one for topaz and astral, which you may find kind of weird if you remember 0.6. That's because Astral wasn't yet in 0.6, yet I still managed to get topaz. which is exclusive to Astral. And the way I've obtained Topaz was that in 0.6, and I think all the bamboo bucket was removed, and its ID was taken by the Topaz gem. So what I did was that I've crafted a bunch of bamboo buckets before they got removed, and then in 0.6 they got turned into Topaz gems, which I then turned into these Topaz blocks and these yellow teleporters. Not sure if you find this kind of stuff interesting, but I do. And here is the finished house expansion. As I mentioned earlier, I only finished this in version 0.6, which is why I'm currently in this version. And here you can see how this entrance hall looks like. As you can see, it's got like 2 floors, just like I've mentioned. Oh, the second floor is mostly kind of decorational. It's there so you can kind of climb to the top and view this place from the top. Version 0.5 also had a rather big technical change, that being a new lighting engine, Starlight, which caused some problems in other worlds because it resulted in this. As you can see, the lighting is broken in the old chunks, so I had to spend some time fixing it. Luckily, fixing this wasn't too hard. I just had to cause some updates for the light by just placing or breaking torches. The broken lighting was also, of course, inside of my house, among other places. I eventually managed to fix the lighting in all of the important areas, but of course I didn't fix it everywhere in the world, as that would take too long, so you may still see some weird lighting in some areas, especially under the water with these lines of light. Also, I just remembered that version 0.5 changed how paintings work, which meant that all of the paintings that I had around my world were replaced with the kebab painting. So I had to replace all of the paintings. And now the version 0.6, which added this mod's first new dimension, that being the Crimson, which you access by jumping into the void through these so-called slipgates, which are basically, holes in the bedrock. I'm currently below my base, which shouldn't normally have a slipgate, since these are old chunks back when Crimson wasn't added, but thankfully I managed to make my own slipgate, which I've been working on throughout the versions. My slipgate started off as a simple hole in the bedrock. You may remember these if you played the very early Minecraft versions, but I had used various techniques to make it larger, one of these being the seed technique. You may remember this trick. You basically just have some farmland below the bedrock and then you plant some seeds on top of it, although it doesn't work in the release version of 0.1, which I am in, so I've only used it during the development of 0.1. I don't remember there being a bedrock breaking trick in 0.2, but there was one in 0.3. As you can see, I got some palm leaves remaining here, and it's because I used palm trees to break all this bedrock. The reason why these leaves are remaining here is because the leaf decay was different in these versions. The way this trick worked was fairly simple. Basically, whenever a palm grew sideways like this, it would have some blocks around the center bottom block, and any block below these blocks would be replaced with dirt. So what I would do is that I would just place some dirt between the bedrock, and then I would grow the palm. As you can see, this one is straight, so it doesn't have any of the blocks on the sides. But if I grow it again, then I get a sideways one, and as you can see, the bedrock got replaced with dirt. Of course, this trick doesn't work anymore in the latest version, as the columns now have a different shape. As you can see here, all of these don't have the locks at the bottom. Of course, there was a problem with this trick, which was that palm trees need space to grow, which is why I needed to dig out all of this space for them to grow. Other things that I would use were flags or ticket torches. Basically, the way it would work was that you would just place a flag or ticket torch below the bedrock, and it would just remove the bedrock, which wasn't too powerful, but it was still useful. But the most powerful trick for removing bedrock came during the development of 1.0, and you use the cloud in a bottle for that. That's because when you right-click the cloud in a bottle, it would create a platform out of cloud blocks, and as it turns out, the cloud blocks would just remove blocks, so I would use these bottles to remove the bedrock to create a big slipgate. And here is the end product, a very big slipgate, much bigger than the ones that generate naturally. Of course, this isn't possible to create anymore as the cloud in a bottle was replaced with the cloud amulet, which doesn't have the ability to create the cloud platforms. And as you saw later on, I would also decorate the slipgate and make a proper entrance to it by decorating the tunnel that leads to it. During this time, I have also built this, which is a platform that you appear on when you exit the Crimson Dimension. But enough about the slipgate, now it's time to jump into the Crimson Dimension. As you can see, I got quite a big hole above me, and that's because back then whenever you jump into the Crimson Dimension, a hole would get carved around you, and so I just jumped down at a bunch of different locations to end up with this. The chunks around me were generated during the early development of 0.6, back when there were no biomes in the Crimson Dimension, which means that they aren't too interesting, but there is one interesting thing to them, which is water. And the way that I got it here was using the Pamphlet of Oriel, which back then could be found in the Crimson Dimension. And basically what I did was I collected some ice using it. I picked it up, then kind of dropped it into a block to get it in the item form. Then I would place it down and just break it to get the water. This was eventually patched, but I don't remember when. As you can see, I've placed quite a lot of water in this area. A lot of water. I've been meaning to build stuff around it, but I haven't really done so yet. I also placed water below some fire imp spawners, so I could farm them for fire charges, but I never ended up finishing the farm, and since then fire imps have stopped dropping fire charges, so I don't think I'll ever finish this farm. And of course, as with the other things, I have used my videos to explore the new stuff that was added, the new blocks, items, mobs, biomes, and structures. I have also discovered a dupe glitch with the graves during the development of 0.6. Basically, when you push them with graves, they would just drop their items and not get destroyed, so you could just get infinitely many items from them. And so I of course used it to my advantage and created a dupe stash. I don't think there's too much to say about the Crimson Dimension in my world, as I haven't built too much in it. There are a few more things that I'd like to mention. The first being this biome chunk border, which happened because of the fact that these chunks were generated before biomes were added. The second being these trees, which as you can see have got the Hellbark caps instead of the Nylium caps, which happened because of some metadata change. The other being these trees, which have got Hellbark caps instead of Nylium caps. It happened because of some metadata changes, but I can't remember what exactly happened. Same thing happened to the Hellbark trees, which back then used to have a different tree shapes. Now the Hellbark trees have the same shape as the 1.16 Crimson trees. And lastly, there are these blocks, which used to be Ember blocks, which used to have the same ID as the Mushroom caps and the Nylium caps and the Hellbark caps, but later on they were given their own ID, which means that the Ember blocks that used to be here turned into Nylium caps. I guess this is why the trees that I have shown looked weird. That's because, when the Ember blocks were given their own ID, the metadata values for the Kappa blocks kind of got shifted, and we ended up with those trees looking like that. During this time I had also worked on a bunch of projects The first being to turn this Lich Castle into a farm, where I would farm the Lich Archers and Lich Warriors. I believe the Lich Archers are now called Strays, and I can't remember what the Lich Warriors are called now, but as you can see, I got a bunch of spawners here, and a bunch of spawners here. Those would of course spawn the mobs, and I would just stand here to collect any excess crops that didn't get collected by the collectors here. And thanks to that I managed to get quite a lot of bones, frost arrows, and regular arrows. And I have also built this chair path here, which takes you to another of my outposts. The reason I did this was because you can use chairs for fast travel, especially if you right click very quickly to sit on them, just like you can do with the cushions in the newest snapshots. This is the outpost that the path leads to, and it is a mining outpost that I've built so I could access this mesa to mine the hardened clay from. As you may have noticed, I had built this house out of bone blocks, and that's because I wanted to experiment with them as a building material. I'd say this house turned out decently, although it probably could have been better. And also you may notice that the logs are kind of rotated weirdly, and that's because there have been some metadata changes to logs during the development of 0.6, which caused this. And next to the outpost I had also built this bridge, which you can use to access the chair path. I think the bridge turned out quite well. This outpost can be accessed using the blue teleporter, and you can also get to another outpost from here by following this river on a boat. By following the river, you will eventually reach the ocean, where you just need to make sure that you have got land on your right. And if you do that, you will eventually reach this place, which I had used as a tree farm by using the Tree of Life or Yggdrasil dungeons. I've also built this house on top of the farm, which I can use to access this area using the teleporter, and also as miscellaneous storage. Over here is a warehouse where I store all the logs that I found in this place. There's quite a lot. The way this farm works is very simple. Basically the treants spawn in, get killed by the withering roses, then their items get kind of flown around until they end up in these water streams. Those water streams carry them to this water elevator, which takes them to the collectors, and then to me in case they overflow. And next to the tree farm is a pig farm, which I've made using some duplicated spawners that I first acquired in the development builds of 0.1. And on top of the pig farm are some hell forges, which I use to smelt the logs into charcoal and the pork into cooked pork. I've worked on this area during the development of 0.6, during which a lot of changes happened, a lot of things were added, and one of those things were the events. There were 4 events back then, those being the Bleeding Sky, the Blue Moon, the Bad Sun, and the Fog event, which is now removed. And so because of the events I kind of made some changes, well, specifically because of the Bad Sun event. The principle behind the Bad Sun event is simple. It's basically that whenever you stand under open sky, you get set on fire, and the mobs also get set on fire. And for that reason, I have installed a bunch of measures around this base so I could travel from one place to another without being exposed to the sky if a Bad Sun event were to happen. You got this sort of bridge, for example, so I can get from this wall to over that wall without being exposed to the sky. And you can also walk through the walls, and one of the places you can reach by going in them is the warehouse through this tunnel. You can just go up here and reach it. Another thing that was introduced during the development of 0.6 was the mechanic of torches burning out when exposed to rain, and it was also removed during the development of 0.6, which of course meant that the burned out torches were removed and their ID was taken by the brake tracks, which is why you see these brake tracks in weird places around this outpost. The torch burnout mechanic was also reintroduced and removed during the development of version 1.0, and when that happened, the burnout torches were this time replaced by the glowers, which you can find in the Astral Dimension. And I would also like to mention this pumpkin farm, which I had also built during this version, and I had built it inside of a giant pumpkin block. Anyway, all of these projects and the fact that I hadn't finished the 0.5 expansion meant that I didn't really have the time to work on the 0.6 expansion, which wasn't helped by the fact that I didn't really have a design in mind for it. So it took me like until the development of 1.0 for me to, finally start to take this place out and to, actually work on it. But eventually I would expand my house for version 0.6, and here is what I came up with. There are 2 rooms, and this is the first one, which I've made kind of big, but I've kind of divided into different sections, which got a different purpose. Got a sort of decorative section, and you got a sort of storage section where I got some miscellaneous stuff, then another storage section where I got some ammo and ranged weapons, and another section related to enchanting, since 0.6 added enchanting. And next to this room is a corridor which leads into a mini version of the Crimson Dimension, which I had built so I could use it to store the dungeon items that I collected in the Crimson Dimension. And there were also other changes done in version 0.6. For example, certain foods would now give buffs. For example, cooked pork would now give strength. Also, copper was added, along with the copper gear and some stuff made out of copper. Although back then we didn't yet have the copper armor, instead we had the studded armor. There were also some machines added, among other things. Of course, version 0.5 also did some other things, like changing the early game progression by removing the wooden tools, so now you get stone tools first instead. And it also made some changes to the overworld biomes, among other things. And now on to version 1.0, the one when this mod was still referred to as Infdev Plus. As you may know, this version added the Astral Dimension and the Void Dimension. As you can see, we are currently in the Astral Dimension, which may look a bit weird to you, and it's because these chunks were generated in the early development builds of 1.0, like the very early ones. The other chunks around here were also generated in the early development builds of 1.0, like different ones. Basically what I did was I kind of accessed this dimension in one of the first builds, then I updated to another one and walked in one of the directions, then I accessed it in another version, walked in another direction, and I did this for all 4 of the cardinal directions, so all of the chunks around these center ones were made in different early dev builds. I haven't really done too much in this dimension. I mainly just kind of explore it in my videos, trying to, know the new blocks, items, mobs, structures, and such things. There are only really few things that I like to show. The first being a prototype biome, which is kind of a sky mesa biome, which you can see around me. This biome was eventually, the sky mesa biome would later be replaced by the Sacred Hills biome during the development. Here you can see an early version of the Sacred Hills biome, and of course I've kind of shown this in one of my episodes, the development, the different iteration of this biome, starting with like the mesa and ending with the final version of the Sacred Hills biome, and of course everything in between and around. Another thing that I want to show are these willows, which kind of generated in weird places during the development. As you can see here, they generated at the bottom of the world, but there were also instances of them generating on clouds, I think. And later on, one of the minor versions of 1.0 had slip gates generated in the astral dimension, although I generated a bunch of chunks which had these. When it comes to the void dimension, there isn't really anything for me to mention, as I have done almost nothing with it. The only noteworthy place is this, where I've used to farm stalkers, but I can't anymore thanks to the somewhat recent biome changes which caused these overworld mobs to spawn here. Of course, this won't affect the new worlds. Now, if you've been paying attention, you will remember that version 0.5 added the overworld dungeons, which is why I've built a room where I would store the items from those dungeons. And for 0.6 I did the same, where I built a room where I would store the Crimson dungeon items. So the question is, where did I store the items from the Astral dungeons? I didn't store them here, as this is a pure decorative build. And as it turns out, the place where I store them is up in the sky on these floating islands, which I built to kind of represent the different biomes found within the astral dimension, all of the biomes. And I've also built these miniature versions of the structures that you can find in the astral dimension, and I've connected all of these to the tower using this floating bridge. And here's a closer look at these islands. As you might be able to guess, it took quite a bit of effort to build these, but I'd say it was all worth it. I should have built these in a single episode, and I even made sure to include a time lapse of me building them at the end. And since version 1.0 also added beacons, I decided to make this place where I got the beacons with all of the effects at max level, and I've also made it so I can, toggle each individual beacon. As for the other things that I done after version 1.0, back when it was still called Infdev Plus, there is displays, which I've created as sort of a place where I've put the things I plan to do. As you can see, I get these sort of bounty boards, as I call them, with signs, and each of these signs has got something that I could do, and whenever I do that thing, I just dye this using a green dye. I've also started working on this area during the development of 1.0, which was meant as a bit more of a joke. I've made it because I wanted to use up the cobblestone that I've acquired while expanding my home, and I decided to use it up on this tower that has got this sort of bridge attached to it. Although this is a newer copy of the world, it was created sometime after version 1.0 was released, so you may see things like this farm, which I've created while trying to get all of the achievements. Of course, I didn't go to this area simply to show this tower and its surroundings. That's because this tower has something interesting inside of it, those being these command blocks, which I have managed to acquire during the development of version 1.0 because of some of the changes that happened in the past. I've explained it in one of my episodes, so you can check it out there. I also have this command block right over here, which has got the /imagine command inside of it. You'll have to figure out by yourself what this command does. Also, the bridge that's attached to the tower is quite long, and if you keep following it, you'll reach a few interesting places. One of those places is this castle. Now, as you can see, there is the bridge in the distance. By the way, I finished this castle on the 20th of January 2025, and the reasons why I decided to build this was because I wanted to experiment with some gradients, get the gradients with the white rock, the cobbled basalt, and the basalt bricks at the top. Anyway, the reason why I'm showing this is because I don't think I've shown it in any of my episodes, since I kind of built this off camera. There isn't actually too much to this castle. There's just this small building on the inside where I've kept some of my building resources so that I could maybe later take them back. but currently I don't need any of those. The last two things that I had built outside of my base were these two minecart stations, which I had built at each end of the minecart track, which I had used to get the on-rail achievement. And I have also worked on my garden. As you can see in this place, I kind of split it into different sections. For example, this section represents the cold biomes, this hot biomes, and warm biomes. We got shroomland, and this section is supposed to kind of represent the temperate biomes, although I haven't yet worked on it. I've also built these carrots, and I've also built a big tree. Here you can see an earlier version of it when it was still being built. And here's the finished version of the tree, which has got a river behind it, for which I had to do a bit of landscaping, because I had to cover the terrain that was beneath it. I can feel like I hadn't done all that much work. Anyway, I feel like I haven't done all that much work in between versions 1.0 of Infdev Plus and 1.0 of Infinite, which I guess is a bit confusing to say like this is because it's still the same mod. We had like two versions 1.0, one for when it was still Infdev Plus and it was fully released, and one version 1.0 for when it was rebranded. So maybe I should use my episode as a reference and say that I only released 14 episodes after I released the one where I defeated the final boss of Infdev Plus, which was episode 40. So I guess that's the reason why I haven't done all that much progress. After all, I still had to finish the 0.6 expansion of my house because I haven't finished it during the development of 0.6 or 1.0. I had to do the expansion for 1.0. I worked on the garden, and I also had to do some more exploring in the astral dimension, crimson dimension, and the white dimension. Well, I don't think I explored the white dimension too much. And I've also shown the changes that were happening during the Cone cleanup after, that was happening after version 1.0 of Infdev Plus was released. That isn't important. The important thing is that this world is quite big, as it is now 3 years old. And so I wanted to use this video to show you the things that I had done while playing through the different versions. Of course, I haven't shown all the things that I had done throughout the 3 years, as I feel like it would take too long to do, and it would make the video too long. But if you want to, you can check out my world yourself, as I'll be including a download link in the description below. One more thing that I'd like to mention is that I will still keep working on new episodes for this series, even if the mod isn't getting updated. Although I don't know how often will the episodes be released, as I also want to work on other series as well. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video despite it being a bit messy. The reason for it is because I kind of didn't plan it properly, and I kind of had less time than I expected, as I want to release it on the 4th anniversary of the creation of this world. But regardless, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.